You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to RX Radio. Today it's just us. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a Q&A. I put up a question box on my Instagram this morning. And to be honest, a lot of times the questions are hard to read, like literally hard to read. Like not real words, not well-formed questions. But I've had at least 5 to 8 literate people ask questions. I'm just fucking around. But no, they're for sure literate because they're great questions that we're going to roll through on today's episode. So if there's a format that you guys like and you guys have questions that you want answered on air, I'll put up a question box a little bit more frequently and we can do this. But before we roll into it today, just a few updates. We have a class of the level 1. We have our spring class underway right now. Registration has closed for this current semester. But if you are interested, we will have our next semester, our fall semester, I guess you could call it that. It will go live in late August. It will start in late August. Sales will go live June 30th. So between now and then is your only opportunity to get a discount on the level 1. If you go over to the website, www.pre-script.com, on the homepage, click into the level 1, and there will be a box to put your email in. So put your email in, join the mailing list, and then on June 30th, when the course registration goes live, you will get an email with the discount code for the level 1. That is our only discount on this course. And speaking of that, we are having the return of our Prescript Nutrition course. So I believe the last time this ran was last June. So it's been about a year. This Dr. Dwayne Jackson will be running that. It's I think it's scheduled for 14 weeks. It's probably going to be a bit longer than that. Dwayne is very thorough with this course. He does a great job. Kind of starts from the beginning and builds it up, a very complete understanding of how to use and leverage nutrition in your coaching to get better results for your clients, whether that's performance, whether that's body composition, whatever your goals are. Dwayne knows how to use nutrition to get there. So if you are interested, there's going to be a slim window to get your name on that opt-in list. So go over again to the website, prescript.com, click into the Prescript Nutrition course. There will be a box to put your email. Go ahead and put your email on that list, and we will send you an email when registration goes live, which will be very soon. I don't have an exact date just yet on this one. But keep your eyes on your email for that. It will be opening up for registration soon, and that course will start in late June. All right. So now we've gotten that out of the way, let's get into some of these questions. I do the question thing on Instagram a lot, but the unfortunate thing is the question box a lot of times it doesn't allow for enough characters to ask great questions. So they're not great questions, and then people end up getting not great answers or very general answers, just because of the means of which that I can reply to these questions. So so today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in, and I got some pretty good questions. We'll go through them here today. I kind of glanced at these, but I haven't really prepared any answers, so you guys get to kind of see me being put on the spot right now. One that I do appreciate, we'll kind of start off. There's a few of these that kind of link together, but the homie Eric Miller, Prescript Level 3 coach. Look him up if you don't know who he is. He just sent me a DM with a slightly longer question. So if I am doing this in the future and you guys have questions that won't fit in the question box, feel free to go ahead and shoot me a DM with your question. Historically, I'm terrible at responding to DMs, so I very well may not reply to it, but it may be on the podcast. And there's also a funny one on here. So I'll give a little context on this. We'll start here and then we'll get into the real shit. It's getting to be summertime, late spring here in Northern California. Weather's beautiful. I like to do a lot of my training in socks. I like to do it without shoes. Where I work, it's obviously I work in a gym where my office is, and a lot of the time there's no one around in between their class times or like before 3 p.m. Like probably 11 to noon, and then like 1 to 3 are like the dead hours for pretty much any gym. Maybe an earlier, like 10 to noon. So that's typically when I will train, is when no one's fucking there. So I train without shoes on. And, I could thank like Jorge, Ridpath, Shallow, a few other people. But Mac, for getting me into buying these stupid shoes, the Jordan 1s, Jordan 1 lows particularly, that I like to wear all the time. And this is one of the less masculine things that I'll admit to. And I won't go off on a tangent here. Maybe I will. But with my Jordan 1 lows, I wear like low-cut socks because I think it looks better. I think it feels better. So Keegan Dillon asked me in this Q&A, why do you like such tiny socks? And you know what? I like how they feel, and I like the look with the Jordan 1 lows, but I don't like that every single time I put them on my feet and I look at them, I'm reminded how feminine they look. It's just a very feminine style of sock to wear. So there's the answer to your question, Keegan. Yeah, not proud to admit that. The two most feminine things I've done, I think, that I'll admit to doing is wearing those low-cut socks. And this isn't a habitual thing, but I brushed my tongue the other day when I was brushing my teeth. And no self-respecting man should ever brush his tongue with a toothbrush. It's a very emasculating thing. We'll just say that. Like, just be a man about it. Brush your teeth, floss them, use some mouthwash. If it gets to the point where your breath is so bad that you need to brush your tongue, just start smoking. Maybe just like mint flavored nicotine pouches, or drink more coffee or something, but just don't brush your tongue. Anyways, moving on. From low cut socks into foot and lower leg questions. I feel like this is something that has gotten a lot of popularity in the recent past. There's like phases that I see, like we'll call nerds, or like biomechanic nerds, or like the counterculture internet people kind of go through, where they'll take things that are less broadly understood, like rib cage mechanics was one a few years ago. A lot of nerds talking about rib cages. Now I think that's feet. I think that's feet and ankles and lower leg stability. That's what the nerds have moved on to in this current time. But this is a question from Eric Miller, like I said, on Instagram. Eric Miller 4444. 4 4s. Easy to remember. So he said, why does foot pronation have upstream effects at the knee, hip, pelvis, and possibly above? Yes, I had this discussion in applied biomechanics class the other day. And that's an interesting one to me. So we'll talk about the foot stuff in just a minute, but first let's talk about biomechanics. Like, this isn't religion. This isn't a belief system. This is a science. This is the science of how joint surfaces move, right? This is something that's widely observed, agreed upon, accepted. Like, this isn't a debate for the internet. This isn't global warming. This is literally just the way that joints move because of the shape of the joint surface and the biological interactions of the neuromuscular system on those joint surfaces. This isn't something that we can really debate too much on, right? There's implications that we can pull on this, and then, we can overlay training principles to kind of, have a discussion or debate around maybe the best ways to train across that joint and more and less effective exercises or loading patterns or parameters and things like that. Yes, I absolutely believe that. There's discussion to be had around this, but like, not really when it comes to the actual mechanics of an area. And like there is a distinction around the foot and around the ankle that I will make that, could lead to a misinterpretation here. But largely the reason why, let me look at this question again so I answer the right question. Okay, so why does foot pronation have upstream effects? Okay, so foot pronation is the flattening of the arch, right? It's going to be, there's going to be an interaction of the bones of the foot, and really what we're looking at here is going to be the talus and the tibia, like the main joints of the ankle, right? The way that the lower leg interacts with the foot. And as that foot changes shape from supination to pronation, and like those as bookends, but kind of that moving in that direction of the foot flattening out, it's going to change the way, basically just the direction that joint surface is facing. And if you know what a talus looks like, and you know what the distal surface of a tibia looks like, the talus is kind of this domed bone, and then there's this concavity of the tibia. So the thing about that, though, is it's not a perfect dome shape. It's kind of oblonged, and like some surfaces are more flat, some are more convex. So what's happening here is not only is the movement in the foot, it's changing. If we were to put a dot right on the top of that talus, it's changing the direction of that, but it's also changing the curvature at which that direction points. So what's happening now is that as the foot changes shape and that foot flattens out, we pronate, it's just creating a completely different vector for the way that we will be able to organize our center of mass on top of that, right? So the discussion point here is that, yes, this is true if we're talking closed chain movement, if we're talking foot on the ground, foot on some sort of surface that is weight bearing, right? That even includes like a leg press or a step up, something of that sort. So basically what I'm saying is that if our foot is weight bearing on the ground and that foot changes shape, it's going to change the direction at which we interact with the lower leg, the tibia, at that ankle joint. So there has to be some sort of upstream effects from that, right? Whether that's rotation, whether that's dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, which if we're doing that at the tibia, then that also, there has to be some sort of interaction proximally with the femur at the knee joint. And then the femur is also proximally going to interact with the pelvis. And then that input into the pelvis is, yes, going to have upstream effects into how we move at the SI joint, through the sacrum, and through the spine, the abdomen, the lumbar spine. So there's not really much of a discussion to be had here. Is that it's not a question of if foot pronation and supination affects upstream. It's how does that affect? Like it is happening. It absolutely is happening. And the caveat to that is the only way it's not happening is if we're talking true open chain movement, where foot is off the ground and we're just changing shape of the foot and the tibia is stationary, right? And there's very few movements that we're going to do like that. And the thing about that is that compared to the weight of your body and gravity and any other external implement that you're going to use, it's going to be very low stimulus. So it's going to have a very small overall effect on how you move when you're not doing that exercise. So that's my take on that. I mean, I don't think there's much of a discussion there, but there shouldn't be any discussion of if that's true or not in a biomechanics class. It's more so, what are the implications because of that, right? As we pronate and supinate, and how does that correlate to being able to get into plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, and then the interaction of the tibia because of that. So that is how I would answer your question, Eric. Let's see. We'll do a quick scan here and see which one is next. Science-based people and back squats. All right, here we go. We'll switch up with a weightlifting one. a.guy.training.in.a.gym. A guy training a gym asks, I've been thinking on start weightlifting, but I just discovered that I have a hernia. S5. Thoughts? Yeah, actually, the more thing, I have no idea what the fuck you mean right there. So a hernia refers to like a bulge through the abdominal wall, like an intestinal bulge through the abdominal wall. A disc herniation would be that same thing, a bulging of the disc, sometimes applying pressure to the nerve, sometimes not, but nonetheless a sign of trauma to the disc. S5, though, there's no S5 disc. Like your sacrum is a bunch of fused vertebrae that do not have a disc in between. So I'm going, this is why I don't do question boxes, and this is why the majority of them I don't answer. But I'm assuming that what you're saying is that you have a disc herniation at L5, and you can hit me in the DM if I'm interpreting this wrong, but that's how we're going to answer this question, as if we're talking about a disc herniation in the lumbar. L5 S1 is a very common disc herniation. I'd say especially in weightlifting, but in a lot of people. L4, L5, L5, S1, probably the most commonly herniated discs. Just because there is a lot of stress at that transitional segment between the lumbar and the sacrum. Like I said, if you know, I don't know, Marshall, show them what a sacrum is. But a sacrum is basically this triangle-shaped bone. It's 5 vertebrae that are fused together. So there's no movement between those 5 vertebrae. And then it has a joint with our pelvis, our ilium, on each side, which makes up our SI joint. And then the joint above with our 5th lumbar. Now, the reason that we get a lot of stress in this area is because, like I said, there's a little bit of rotation, a little bit of movement in that SI joint, but much less than something like a hip, or even like relative to our L4, L5 joint, the joint above that transition, is that it's going to move a little bit, but then when the sacrum and the pelvis stops moving, that's when L5 is going to start moving. And because it is that first segment in that transition, we're going to get the most movement there. And if we have an increased demand for movement, then it will go to the next one, L4, and upwards from there. So that's why a lot of times people who either have limited range of motion at the hip, or a lack of an understanding of how to stabilize the pelvis and control the lumbar spine, that's when we can get repetitive stress injuries that will result in herniations at the lower lumbar discs. So as we think of that and a common cause, and there is, of course, traumatic causes of this, so not to say that, you know, we won't rule that out. I don't know the situation here specifically, but more broadly, it is a repetitive stress injury, and it is due to either a lack of control through that lower lumbar into the pelvis, and or a lack of range of motion at the hip. It's very much a case of, if you don't have enough movement in one region, you're going to start to move more from the adjacent region, which happens to be the lumbar spine here. So if your goal is to start the sport of weightlifting, and you have this herniation, like, it's a disc herniation isn't a permanent thing. It isn't something that contraindicates moving in the future. It's not something that should be plaguing you for the rest of your athletic career. It can be. It depends on how it's managed. It depends on the degree. It depends on prior injuries. And a lot of it depends on that rehab process. So the first thing I'll say is that whatever the injury is here, that tissue that is currently damaged, currently injured, was under too much stress. So there needs to be a period where, first off, we're going to manage symptoms, right? Acutely, it's going to be about getting the symptoms to calm down while letting the tissues heal, right? So whatever you did to injure that area, we're not going to do for a while, because that's going to impact those tissues in a very similar way that caused that injury or led to that injury. But in that time where we're managing symptoms and we're allowing the tissue to heal, a lot of times we can be really productive in other areas. And if we're going under the assumption that this is an L5 disc herniation, and the reason that happened was because there's a lack of control at the lumbar, so we'll say pelvic stability or core stability, I'll use those interchangeably, or there's a lack of movement at the hips. So neither of those things, if those are issues that you're having, are going to lend well to the sport of weightlifting. You're not going to be a great weightlifter if you can't control your core and you can't access full range of motion at the hips. So that's something that you can still be very productive in clearing up to some degree in that time where things are still acute, where you're still having symptoms. And the thing is, the better you get at controlling the core, and the better the movement you have through the hip, that's going to take stress off of the lumbar. So especially that L5 S1. So this is something that fits in very early on in the rehab process, and it's something that will span your entire athletic career. It's just at first when these things are a little less familiar, or we have to make adaptations to allow you to be successful there. That's when it requires the most work, and that's both cognitively, like in terms of learning new positions, unlearning old positions, maybe the more difficult of the two, and then actually just building the capacity to hold those positions, having the awareness to know when you're leaving that position, and building the capacity to hold that position. That becomes the entire progression as we look at this from the beginning stages. So, like very low grade exercises to get someone to build awareness around resisting movement in the core, that's step number one. And that can be, depending on how acute things are, that can be like McGill's Big Three, like side plank, bird dog curl up. Sick. Yes, that checks the box. That meets the requirement of building an understanding of how to resist force through all three planes in the core. That's exactly what we need to do. But we need to then, after we have that awareness of what that feels like, what those positions are like, then we need to start to scale that. We need to find more demanding positions. We need to find things that we can hold for longer durations against greater, I'll say loads, but like volume, load, deviation of basis support, center of mass. Like these are all valuable things when it comes to building up that awareness around the core. And then these are things that also I'll start with more static, like isometric holds, and then I'll move once there's less symptoms. We can move without recreating symptoms or causing pain. I'll move to more dynamic variations. So things where you're actually moving through lateral flexion, rotation, flexion, extension at the spine. And that's a pretty good understanding of control through the core in isolation. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is it's the hips. It's how are we moving at the hips? What are we doing at the hips? And if there's a limitation in range of motion through that ball and socket joint of the hips, a lot of times that is your nervous system protecting you against moving away that it doesn't believe that you can stabilize. So it's going to create tension. Your brain's going to send a signal to the muscles that stabilize rotation, stabilize flexion, extension at the hip, and it's going to create neuromuscular tension in those areas to not let you move in ways that you are not equipped to handle. So we need to start to override the nervous system, that protection mechanism, by giving it a stimulus of stability, of control. So this goes the exact same way in my brain as we start with isometrics. Like, do some sort of assessment, like figure out positions in which range of motion is limited, and that is due to musculature and not structure. And then we need to get you in a position to lengthen that tissue against load. So whether that's internal rotation, whether that's hip extension, whether that's a combination of the two, which it probably is. Doing that is, like a goblet loaded isometric lunge hold. Beautiful. Goblet loaded is important here because the limiting factor to range of motion at the hip is going to be stability on both sides of that joint. And what the L5 disc herniation is telling us is that there wasn't stability proximally at the pelvis, at the lumbar spine. So by using a goblet load, it allows you to get into a more neutral lumbar position. It forces you to use your core musculature to be able to maintain that stacked position. So there's no movement at the pelvis through the lumbar spine because your core is resisting that, which it needs to be doing. And then as you get into hip extension, you're actually able to extend from the hip and not just extend from the lumbar spine. So that's an important distinction. That's kind of the awareness side of this, is that we need to get you to understand that pelvis movement is different than hip movement, and we need to be able to get through full range of motion at the hip without moving the pelvis, while still stabilizing the pelvis. And that's that layer of understanding is the hardest part. Once you can understand that, and yes, cognitively understand it, but physically understand it too, is be able to use your brain to differentiate those two things and capitalize on a neutral pelvis while moving through rotation at the hip, extension at the hip, and moving that, again, same way as the core, in more dynamic ways where, okay, now let's do some split squats, let's do some walking lunges, let's do some B stance RDL, things that are going to require you to stabilize the lumbar spine, stabilize the core, while still have the freedom to move at the hip. Those are the things that are going to allow you to build the conscious awareness around core positioning, the conscious awareness around hip movement independent of pelvis movement, that are going to then transfer and allow you to be more successful in the things that you're already doing, and then also start to learn a new skill, which is weightlifting, which is, there's technicalities and complexities in that itself. But I'll tell you right now, a common fault that I see with, I don't know, probably 100% of people at some point, especially early on in their weightlifting career, is that they can't differentiate thoracic extension from lumbar extension. And they have this like crazy bias towards spinal extension. So being able to differentiate every, movement at every single joint region level here is going to be really important, because if you get into that pattern of just having this kind of blind spinal extension, probably going to re-injure that disc. That's just my 2 cents on a question that I made up, because I'm not even sure if that's the question that you asked me. But hopefully that's helpful. If not, hit me the DM and tell me I'm an idiot, and we can go back and forth on what's actually happening. All right, next one from Juarez Fitness _. You mentioned you don't like barbell single leg RDLs. Can you go into detail why? Well, yes, I can. So it's a barbell single leg RDL is sending a mixed message in my mind, especially to someone that, say someone sees that on their program and they say, okay, barbell single leg RDL. A barbell is a very stable surface. It allows them to create stability through the upper body in a closed chain manner. It is equipped to load with a lot of weight, and every single person that has ever done something in a gym, they're going to do more weight on a barbell than they will any other implement aside from a machine, right? So when we put a barbell in someone's hands, on their back, on their shoulders, we're telling them this is something that is a progression for load, essentially, without telling them that. We're giving them a slightly higher degree of stability and the potential to put hundreds of pounds on that thing. But the message when we tell someone to stand on one leg is not that. There's an inconsistency there. Is that when I tell someone to stand on one leg, what I'm telling you is I want you to not fall over. I want you to improve your ability to accommodate your center of mass, your base of support, to create balance in this. And then when I put them on one leg and I tell them to move like a hinge, I'm telling you to do that dynamically, right? So it's this there's a lot of variance in what needs to happen to stay balanced in a single leg RDL. So that inherently is going to decrease the amount of load that I would use with something like that. Because the intention of something like that is not to get stronger at single leg RDLs. The intention is to have a better understanding of how to accommodate your center of mass to your base of support, right? And to put that into one word is proprioception. This is a proprioceptive exercise versus if we look at, just say like an RDL with a barbell, this is an output exercise, right? There is going to be a degree of accommodating center of mass to base of support in everything that we do with load. But the idea here is that one of these is incredibly stable and the other one is incredibly unstable, right? And a progression for unstable things is not doing unstable things heavier, right? It's being able to control that range of motion better. I can't think of anyone who wanted to increase their deadlift or improve their low back pain. And I'm like, all right, we need to get your single leg RDL really fucking heavy. And that's going to be the answer to this, right? So the benefit of doing things unilateral is, yes, we will get better at these over time. And yes, we will increase loading over time. But the benefit here is the coordination that comes with that and the control that comes with that. So as we do things, even like looking at a single leg RDL versus a bilateral RDL, the big difference here is the demands on everything that's not the glute and the hamstrings, right? The rotational demand on the hip, the demand on the core, the demand on the lower leg to be able to maintain positions that allow us to be balanced and stable enough to go through that hinging movement. And a lot of time that requires a lot more range of motion, especially at the hip, than what we'll access in a bilateral RDL. So if you're doing one of these in your program, you clearly have the availability to do both of these in your program. So if there's something that's really well equipped to handle load, that's where I'm going to put that. I'm going to channel their energy into getting better at loading an RDL, because that's going to be a far more effective stimulus in terms of output than increasing load on a single leg RDL, because the weight is going to be so much less to the point where they're not going to get the stimulus. It's not going to be an adaptable stimulus in terms of a loading progression. It's going to limit the way that they move in a way that they're not going to get the stimulus of adapting in a way that's going to create better stability, more range of motion, better control, better proprioception at the hips. So it's really blunting both sides of that adaptation. If I do a single leg RDL and I give someone, say, a dumbbell contralateral, that's enough of a stimulus where they can feel that there's load there. They're going to accommodate their center of mass in a way that gravity will allow, but it's going to allow for more range of motion. It's going to allow them, so a single dumbbell is actually going to enhance the effect of moving through a greater range of motion, because it's going to allow them that, right? Even if you just think of it like the benefit of a single leg RDL is I can create more internal rotation of the pelvis on the femur, which is a range of motion that a lot of people have trouble getting into. It's a very important range of motion for anyone who wants to be able to stabilize their pelvis or stabilize single leg stance. And there's a ton of benefit to controlling that. Now, if I put a barbell in someone's hands, they have a bilateral grip on a barbell, and say even there's plates on that barbell, if I create that internal rotation of the pelvis on the femur, one of the sides of that barbell is going to hit the ground before the other one. And that's going to throw me off balance, or that's going to limit my range of motion. And because of the way that the barbell distributes our weight, it's not just our center of mass, it's our center of mass plus whatever implement that we're holding. With that broader center, that deviated center because of the barbell, really what it's going to force me to do is maintain a center of mass that's very similar to what it would be if I were in a bilateral stance. It's going to be skewed more towards that stance leg, of course, but it's going to be further out than had I just had a contralateral dumbbell or no weight at all. So it's a really bad way to do either of the things you're trying to do, is load an RDL or increase stability or proprioception with a single leg RDL. So a barbell it doesn't make sense unless there's one caveat here. It does make sense if you use it as a fucking landmine, because that's now something that I can use to, yes, you can put a ton of load on that, which, maybe at a certain point you do, but what you can do then is it's external stability, and it's something that they can leverage off of now to create more range of motion, right? As opposed to blunting the range of motion, just holding a barbell in their hands. So that's my perspective on why, if you're going to do a unilateral movement, we do unilateral movements. Yes, increasing load is part of this, but it's the very last consideration. And you're never going to increase load to the same degree that you would with a bilateral loading movement. So by definition, it's going to be less effective, but it is going to be more specific. It's going to be more specific to joint mechanics and how they work in unilateral stance versus bilateral stance. So bilateral stance is going to blunt the mechanics, but it's going to be favorable for loading. Unilateral stance is going to exaggerate the mechanics at the joint, but it's going to blunt the loading. So lean into either of those and do both of them, right? I can't tell you how many sessions I've done that will start with a unilateral variation of a hinge or a lunge, and then I'll have a bilateral variation of, say, a squat or a hinge in that session as well. And that's the best of both worlds, is because you're getting the most out of both adaptations in that scenario, is that I'm going to use the unilateral variation to build my awareness of joint mechanics, to increase my ability to accommodate center of mass over base of support. And I'm going to challenge that. I'm going to use as much weight as I can to and still execute on that to an acceptable degree. But fuck, I don't know, the heaviest B stance RDL, maybe 150 pounds, because that's the heaviest dumbbells I have in my gym. And I've done RDLs with I don't know, 455 or some shit like that. Those are two very different numbers. And even if you do the quick bro math of 150 pounds unilateral is 300 bilateral, it's still fucking less. But the benefit isn't load there, is that I'm loading into a range of motion that I can't get into with my bilateral RDLs. I think that's all I have to say about that. I'm not 100% sure, but that's why I think it's dumb to push unilateral movements for load. And I understand how easily that can be taken out of context, that you want to do these light, and that's not what I'm saying at all. So I want you to do them as heavy as you can while still doing them correctly and still having an adaptable stimulus that is the intention of doing a unilateral exercise, but it's never going to be as heavy as your leg press, your back squat, your front squat, your deadlift, your RDL. And that's what I'm getting at, is that if you want to load, fucking load. If you want to create better balance and stability and create better balance and stability, but they're two different things, so don't try and make them the same. Whew. All right, on to the next one. Oh, there's some good ones in here. All right, I'll put this one next just because it's it kind of pairs nicely with this. But this is TVREES, TV Reese 1. In a world full of optimal and science-based, would you program back squats for hypertrophy? Fuck yeah, I would. Yeah, I haven't made an updated opinion on this in a long time, but optimal, science-based, like it's these people only have an opinion on the internet. Let me say that. Like there's a couple pretty big names in the biomechanics space that I've like come across their stuff, and like trust me, way more people follow them. And I'm not saying they're saying bad things or wrong things, but I just can't buy into it on any more than an intellectual level. Like, interesting concept, I'm gonna move on. Because especially in hypertrophy, no one's gonna listen to the guy that's not big. And I'm not saying the big guy knows everything, the little guy knows nothing, but the most important parts of hypertrophy in my mind are training to failure and eating in a surplus. Period. Right? Like, I guess we could also say like hormone profile, which is a very relevant thing depending on like your biology or your regimen of supplements, we could say. Those are the things that are going to dictate hypertrophy more than anything else. Like, I know a lot of really dumb people that do really dumb shit that are really fucking big. Like, there's optimal is eating enough food and training until you can't pronounce optimal because there's not enough blood in your brain. That's my opinion on this. And even some, we'll call this personal experience. I did, it would have been last summer, I did a hypertrophy block. And I was eating a ton of food. And I was training really fucking hard. And I put on probably a solid 20 pounds, a little more than 20 pounds, probably legitimately 7 inches on my legs. And a huge part of what I did in that was back squatting. Relatively low volume. I don't think I ever did more than 15 working reps in a session. Very high intensity. These were like, even when it was 15 reps, they were like 3 sets of 5, pretty high RPE, like 8, 9 RPE. And the volume only went down and the intensity only went up from there. So yes, I think there is a very large place for back squats. And this is like very parallel to that last conversation, is that yes, to grow muscles, you need to stress those muscles and you need to load those muscles pretty maximally, maximally in terms of proximity to failure. And that can be done with a skilled lifter in a back squat through volume or intensity, right? With a lower skilled lifter, that can be done through a hack squat, a leg press, a quad extension, a split squat, a lunge. Like, all of these things have a place, but understand, like, if we're trying to load tissue close to failure, a back squat will get you a lot of the way there if you're very skilled. But even if you're very skilled, you can pull from these other things to get better results if hypertrophy is the goal and not just strength. Like, do a quad extension, do a bilaterally loaded split squat. Like, these things can be very helpful, because we're not going to reach complete failure on a back squat in terms of muscular failure. We're going to reach technical failure before that, but we can fucking load up a back squat. So that is going to be something that we can extrapolate a lot out of because we're loading it very heavy. And then we can hop onto something more externally supported, or something that demands less load to get an adaptable stimulus like a split squat, and then hop onto a quad extension and just fucking send it until we can't pronounce whatever word we were supposed to pronounce when we started. So in a world full of optimal and science-based, would you program back squats for hypertrophy? Yes, I would. And the only caveat to that would be, so for myself, yes, if someone is not a skilled back squat, or not skilled at the back squat, I might skip it. I might put them on like a pendulum squat. Great. Fantastic. Or hack squat, something like that instead. But I think there's a ton of benefit to having the skill to back squat. I think there's a lot of coordination that it takes to be able to squat well that will lend to you being able to execute other exercises at a high level. And I think there's a lot of kind of tissue qualities in terms of like stability and like proprioception that will also transfer really well to pushing yourself even farther in something that is externally supported, like a pendulum squat or a hack squat. So yes, I am for it. All right, this is a good one. Steve.Spriggs_32, homie. So I have put zero thought into this, so you're going to see me work this out in my brain as I answer it. But for general fitness with no limitations, what determines exercise selection for me? I think that's a really, really good question. And every now and then you'll run into that client that I actually just got one of these that they just want to exercise and they don't necessarily have a well-defined goal. They know that they need to do it to be healthy. They don't really have any injuries in the past. Maybe they have some prior training experience, whatever, but they move really well. There's no big holes in what they're doing in terms of your assessment on them, and you can just kind of program for them. And let me refer back to the question. Sometimes I answer the question I want to answer instead of the actual question. So what determines exercise selection for me? Cool. So kind of like the general things are like frequency. How often are they going to work out? Duration is kind of set for training clients, usually around an hour. And also is their ability level, right? The way that I build programs for anyone, no matter their goal, is taking it back to Eric's question in the beginning, is I build it around function, around what they should biomechanically be able to do and be able to control from more of a local to a regional to a global level. All right. So like generally, like the way that I'll think of this is the core is going to integrate with pretty much everything that I do. I want to focus on basically upper and lower, and I'll split those in different ways depending on how often they're training, what their goals are, etc. But my general kind of the split that I'll use, like if I were to work off a general split that I think would benefit anyone and everyone, would be a 4-day split of upper push, upper pull, lower push, lower pull, core integration. And if it's any different than that, it's a combination of those things together. But those are kind of the 4 realms in which I want to focus on how people are moving. Upper body, essentially I'm trying to get them overhead. So like the centerpiece or their most complex movement of their upper push and upper pull day will be some sort of overhead pushing or overhead pulling. In the lower body, I'm going to be working through some degree of lunging and some degree of hinging, preferably unilateral hinging, like a B stance RDL. And those are those are the movements that I say that I kind of, in my brain, I'm like, all right, the program's going to revolve around getting them to have a high enough level of function that they can execute on every single one of these things. Now, in my brain, I have a variation, or, you know, a kind of a progression, regression of each of these things. And that's where we need to kind of understand where they're at in terms of their capability to be able to pair that and to be able to match that appropriately. So session organization for me is almost always going to be the same. For like a general client like this, it's warm up is probably going to start with a little bit of something passive, whether that's rolling, whether that's stretching, whether that's just like kind of dynamic movement in terms of just opening up range of motion. So like range of motion mobility stuff, moving from passive towards active. And then I'm going to have some sort of stability drills right after that. And it's going to involve core, and it's also going to involve the region of the body that we're going to be training that day. So for like upper body, that could be like a unilateral 90-90 kettlebell bottom up carry. Hand out in front of the body, getting them to stabilize the scapula against the rib cage with some degree of external rotation, and then just kind of walk with that, carry with that. Or it could, honestly, for an upper body day, it could just be a side plank. Like it requires a degree of stability through the shoulder and scapula to maintain that position. And then you're going to integrate the core and the obliques. You could put a foam roller between their knees, have them squeeze out to kind of get more anterior oblique sling. Anything of that sort that is going to activate the core into the region of the body that they're going to train on that specific day. And then with that, I'll usually pair some sort of region-specific like isolation or stability. Like, again, to stick with the shoulder day, I might have them go through just like a dumbbell external rotation, or like a rear delt fly, or like a cable pullover. Something of the sort that's going to get them to coordinate stability through a greater range of motion, or control a range of motion that they're deficient in before they get into the session. So again, warm-up is going to be like some sort of mobility, some sort of stability, and activation through range of motion through the region that they're going to train. And then it would be the first thing that I'm going to do with them is something that's going to have a greater demand for function between, like I said, the core and that body region. So if we're talking like upper body push, it could be a half kneeling landmine press, something where I'm teaching them to stabilize their core, put the rib cage and scapula into a position where there's enough stability that they can get upward rotation, get overhead. For like the flip side of that, maybe it's a single arm cable pull down for someone, or not even like overhead, but like a high incline pull down. So we're getting them into that, you know, range of motion where past 120 degrees of shoulder flexion. So it's not just the shoulder that has to move, it's actually the scapula that has to rotate. And these are going to be things that are, again, I want them earlier on because they're going to be more prone to fatigue. So the more complex, the more coordination that something like this requires, the more body regions that are involved, the more integrated it is versus isolated, then fatigue is really going to affect their technique there. So I want these things earlier on in a session, just so that I can ensure that they're able to progress their technical proficiency there. And if we were to do it later on in a session, then they might be fatigued in areas that they need. They didn't have as much capacity that they would need to stabilize this, so they may not be able to even execute on it to an acceptable degree that they'll be able to have progress there, especially earlier on. So something that's going to get them to express function after their warm-up, and then it's going to be something loadable. Something loadable is probably something that is going to be more externally supported, depending on what you have access to in your gym. That could be barbell bilateral things. That could be, if we're talking like shoulder pressing, that could be like a machine incline press. Something that's more externally stabilized, something that's going to allow them to push output a bit more and actually build some strength do those ranges. And then after that, it's going to be more isolation type work, things that are going to allow them to build capacity in any areas that might be at a deficit, or if pecs are really fried from pressing, but triceps are pretty fresh, then all right, we're going to train triceps, or we're going to train more isolated movement patterns that have maybe like we'll say like an overhead tricep extension. It's primarily, yes, we're going to train a bit of hypertrophy through the triceps. Secondarily, we're going to be able to stabilize the scapula against the rib cage in that upward rotation, and that could be a stimulus that we go to progress. And then there's going to be a tertiary benefit at the core as well, is that we need to understand how to stabilize the rib cage in a way to create that upward rotation at the scapula. So that's going to be kind of the order of things as they progress through. Mobility, warm up, core, regional, range of motion specific, high skill / function exercise, high output exercise, and then accessory with secondary, tertiary benefits. And then like last, if you're going to do any sort of cardio, or like interval type shit, you can do that at the end. Lower skill, like just move stuff at the end always. So that, Steve, is how I'd organize that. All right. Okay. We'll do one more here. Shit. I really have no answer for this one. Damon EV, any tips on how to start selling as a prescript level 1 coach in a new gym? This is a tough one for me to answer because I've never been good at selling, big on selling. And even just in the way of like saying that, like it doesn't feel genuine to me to think of like selling, but like I understand that's the business that we're in. So I don't have a good sales pitch. I never have, I never will. But the thing that's always been the most helpful for me to make sales and gain clients and sell people on my services is being very confident in what I can and can't do, and being very able to communicate that, right? We have a lot of great level 1 coaches. It's awesome to be able to interact with everyone and kind of see what they bring to the table in terms of experience and knowledge. And that's been really cool to get to experience that over the years. And what I'm seeing is that typically people that go through the level 1 and ask questions like this, you're very passionate about what you do. And that passion leads to curiosity, and that leads to you obtaining a lot of information and probably being pretty damn good at what you do. So be confident in that and rely on your previous experience of getting clients results, and be able to communicate that. Like, you don't have to just kind of cold call a list of people or like shit like that, but like talk to people, ask them what their training goals are, and like be genuine about it. Offer advice. And that's a big thing, is like sometimes you're going to have to do things for free. And I'm not saying taking on clients for free, because that can kind of muddy the relationship there of like trainer-client relationship. But like, help people, offer advice. Be like, oh yeah, like I helped a guy with this in the past, and I did this, and this. Why don't you give it a try and let me know how it works? And like, if you can show people that you can get results without even working with them, then they're going to be a lot more willing to give you their money to actually help them when they run into the next thing that they can't figure out, or they know someone else that needs a trainer, is looking for someone who's like, oh yeah, this guy helped me out. So just having conversations and like kind of asking about what people are doing, what their goals, and like doing it in a genuine way where you're just offering help. I think that's something that's always been helpful for me. Another side of that too is like, work with people that don't do what you do, but work with people that need what you do, I guess is the most concise way to word that. But an example of that is like, by trade, I am a chiropractor, but the way I practice is a lot more like a physical therapist or a personal trainer. So where I'm at with my office, I rent office space, and there's someone right next to me that rents office space that is a massage therapist. And he's a great massage therapist, and I refer him clients all the time because I don't do massage therapy. And he refers clients to me all the time because he doesn't do chiropractic, but there could be, people kind of see those as a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram as chiropractic and massage therapy as passive therapies. But he definitely doesn't do exercise. So when he gets clients that he sees that he needs to work with someone that can prescribe exercise and is good with rehab, he sends them to me. And whenever I see someone that needs someone or that needs a massage or like is looking for that more passive touch point, I send them to him. So that can be a really valuable way to build your business, is like network with people like that, with chiropractors that don't do rehab, with massage therapists that don't do rehab. Talk to, if they have like group classes where you're at, talk to the group class instructors and like see if you can help them out, and they can refer people to you. So just kind of building your network in that way, and not necessarily doing it with the approach of sales, but doing it with the approach of genuinely wanting to help people and kind of filling the void where your skill set is needed with a population that, they're not going to be able to get that with where they're trying to seek it. I think they can both be really helpful. But be genuine, try and help people, know your skills, be confident in your skills, and communicate that. I think that's the best way. There's a few more here. I'm not going to get to them today, but if you guys enjoyed that, if this is something that you liked, you want to do more, let me know. Hit me on Instagram. Like I said, I may not respond, but hit the question box at least. And I'm happy to do this again. But I appreciate you guys tuning in today. Like I said, level 1 opt-in list is up. If you guys are looking to get into the class in August, put your email on that list and we will send you a discount. Prescript Nutrition with Dr. Dwayne Jackson will go live in June. I think it's the 24th. Don't quote me on that, but I believe it is. If you're interested in that, opt-in list isn't going to be up for much longer, so go ahead over to the website, click on Prescript Nutrition on the drop-down menu, put your email in there, and we will send you an email when that goes live. All right. Thanks for listening. I appreciate you guys.